The resolution, or say it.
We're here to debate the resolution that is this House would provide means-tested welfare in the forms of basic goods and services, including vouchers, rather than cash payments.
Thank you. Welfare, vouchers, cash payments.
Go ahead.
Today's debate comes down to one simple question. There are members of society so vulnerable, so poor, so means-tested that they cannot fend for their own survival and subsistence, where it is the responsibility of the government to incur a small economic dent in order to guarantee the survival and restitution of these individuals into better circumstances. So today's entire debate is going to come down to this one question. Which side can better provide for the welfare, sustainability and restitution of the poorest, most vulnerable members of society? And I'm here to tell you today why our side takes that case. To start out with, here's our model. We're going to start with a few definitions. Means-tested refers to those unable to survive or find employment in a gainful fashion under the aegis of the law. We'd like to point out that we're open to change this definition to only pertain to the very poorest sections of society, and that this is a floating bar, which means that individuals who are well off enough to not necessarily meet such means-tested subsidies or care from the government is a bar we can change over time. We're just here to debate the very poorest sections of society. Secondly, defining basic goods and services as any amenity or item necessary for the day-to-day sustenance of these individuals, and then furthermore take care of contingency cases like healthcare emergencies, or to start small businesses or enterprises that might contribute to gainful employment in the future. We'd also like to point out that this includes all the dependents of an individual who happens to be subject to this, which makes sense given my first perspective, and also includes food, water, basic housing, electricity, and healthcare. Note that this can come from one of two sources, the government or the private sector. The government, it depends on whether or not it's nationalized, and this could also manifest as subsidies, which we'll come to in a second. Thirdly, we'd like to point out that the means for substituting cash for means-tested welfare for the poorest sections of society include vouchers, subsidies, and a small amount of cash nonetheless. We'd still like to point out that it's a majority of vouchers or subsidies for these individuals. Go ahead.
In your model, you're including both vouchers and
Talk
cash?
to the judges.
Yes, but we still argue, consistent with the motion, that vouchers are a better form than cash, and that a majority should take form as vouchers or subsidies. Moving on to my constructives. Firstly, when we're talking about the stakeholders of greatest concern, so we're talking about the poorest, most vulnerable members of society, which include alcoholics, drug addicts, the disabled, those discriminated against for racial reasons, or factors beyond their control, such as where they come from in terms of locality. We want to make sure that any government aid being given to these people is of maximized utility. There are three main ways in which the utility can be compromised. The first is theft. Cash is more liable to being stolen, often by violent means, than vouchers and foodstuffs. This is just the truth. Secondly, lower corruption rates within governments could manifest in better outcomes or yields when it comes to impact for people. For example, the federal food stamps program is extremely low on corruption and black market sales and trading of food stamps, largely because of technological barriers and a lack of incentive for individuals to trade such favors. The third big point is squandering. We'd like to point out that because of the backgrounds many of these individuals come from, they can be subject to spousal abuse or drug or alcohol habits that could result in the squandering, either by the individual or by a dependent of this money on things they necessarily shouldn't. Bear in mind that the goal of giving them money in the first place is to mitigate any misuse, is to give them a means for restitution and survival. And when it's being spent on drug habits or alcohol, it isn't doing so. In the status quo, all this money is going to be wasted or misspent, whereas in our model, these are mitigable losses. So providing a small cash stipend winds up being for the betterment of these people, and even if they come from bad situations where this money ends up going to waste, it doesn't compromise the sustainability of these individuals in the present, and that's why we think it's better. Go ahead.
So, in your model, if there's a person who's been a drug addict for 6 years and you suddenly stop his cash welfare and he can't take drugs the next day, he's been taking drugs for 6 years, do you think that's good for the person?
Two answers to that. firstly, bear in mind that drug abuse and drug addiction counts as a healthcare issue, and therefore it is in the government's best interest to treat it like one under the same remedies that I propose in my model, which is to say subsidized healthcare if healthcare is in the private sector, or if it's nationalized as in the UK, have the government directly intervene with the healthcare system in order to look after these individuals. My second constructive has to do with the disabled drug addicts and people who face racial prejudice on the daily, and how our model is more beneficial for these individuals. It is blatant that the economy we live in is neither free nor fair and is affected by a multitude of biases. When it comes to vouchers, food stamps, or subsidies which are effected by an unbiased government on individuals in as fair a manner as is possible, especially in one that supersedes the free market, we can ensure that a majority of vouchers, services, and necessary care reaches these individuals with the maximum efficiency. An efficiency that would not be available to the private sector. Furthermore, certain individuals need more care that is beyond the quota of expenditure for a single individual, no matter how rich. For example, the improvement of infrastructure and amenities for the disabled, or the general improvement of neighborhood by reduction of crime rates and cracking down on drug abuse and alcohol abuse, especially for those underage in impoverished neighborhoods, is beyond any scope of expenditure that could be achieved by increasing the amount of cash stipend given to an individual according to side opposition's claim. Therefore, in the status quo, individuals, even if they are given more money, cannot necessarily spend on the improvement of externalities beyond their control. Whereas in our model, a certain amount of expenditure, when it manifests as vouchers, building of infrastructure, ration cards, and subsidies for individuals, might have a much more positive effect. In conclusion, we'd like to point out that this is not a debate about which side is more economically efficient or is trying to save money. We're talking about members of society who contribute negligibly to the economy, but could, given the right framework for their restitution and survival today. In this regard, we believe the government conclusively wins this debate because we best look out for the welfare, sustainability, and restitution of these individuals by ensuring that they're able to look after themselves and their dependents today in the best manner possible without wasting government resources, and in the long term by ensuring that there's long-term development of infrastructure and amenities to further support them as they grow.
Thank you very much for that speech, and now we will welcome leader of the opposition.
There's a shame in poverty that is fundamental to the American dream. The idea that one person can be more successful and make more money means that he who does not is that much less well off. And we think that fundamentally, open government has missed this principle and missed the idea that being poor is not something that we need to correct just to throw it in the face and make ourselves the most virtuous people who are saving all the poor people in the world. That's not the benefit that we're looking for here. In principle, we're going to be showing you two things in this speech. One, why in principle people want their dignity, and two, why in practice people want their cash. So, the first thing that we're going to be looking at is the fact that this round has to be weighed on what welfare system provides the most actual welfare benefits to recipients, because that's what open government is missing. We agree with them when they say that they need to argue for these for vouchers, but what they decide to do instead is to take this middle ground where they're going to propose both cash and vouchers. We asked them to tell us why that's actually better. We think it's rather egregious that they missed the fundamental clash of this debate, where they're supposed to argue on one side that vouchers are good, and we're supposed to argue on the other side that cash is good. Instead, what they've opted into is this extra burden for themselves to show you not that cash is worse or that vouchers are better. Instead, they need to prove to you this awkward middle ground that their situation where you transfer a little bit of money and you give out a couple of vouchers is the best possible option, and that beats what we're showing you, the sole benefits of cash transfers. So if you believe in our side of the house and you believe that there are benefits to cash transfers that in any way exceed the benefits that they give you, by that burden they've given themselves, we automatically win the debate. So, to start with a little bit of extraneous rebuttal, and what they talk about in their second substantive point, they say that our economy is biased and that these vouchers are going to be completely unbiased. They give you no warrants for this argument. In fact, we tell you that this depends on the providers of the services. Why would the government get more efficient? They give you no foundation for this. Instead, we think what you're going to see is that there are only so many places where you can spend these vouchers. There are only so many places that are going to accept them as forms of payment. And that guaranteed client base, that guaranteed knowing that somebody who has a voucher has to come to you to give it to you to get your food services means that you no longer have to compete with the rest of the economy. So instead, if you give somebody money, they're going to have to compete with like Chick-fil-A or another private industry that's actually forced to compete for all of the dollars in the economy. That drives their prices down. That competition is what keeps the market from getting stagnant. And they completely opt out of that on their side of the house by guaranteeing vouchers. So we think that they're actually introducing inefficiency into the market, providing goods and services right there. That's an increase, and that's a loss in the ability of the welfare that they provide to actually benefit the economy that they're trying to do, and to make these poor people better off. That's not the case. Now, let's look at the first substantive argument that they give you. When they tell you that this cash is easier to steal, there's no warrants. You can actually also steal a voucher just as easily as you can steal a dollar. That's why you can sell a voucher just as easily as you can sell a dollar. So that just falls out of the debate. Then they talk about this idea of squandering this money. We're going to clash directly with our first substantive argument. Firstly, the idea here is that people want dignity. It sucks to be the poor person on welfare. It is embarrassing to be the kid at school who has to use meal tickets to get your lunch. And this is a microcosm of what vouchers are actually like. Many students just decide not to eat. Many people don't want to use their vouchers. Why? Do you think that there are tangible harms to these vouchers? Well, firstly, you spend your entire day running around cashing them. You lose the ability to actually look for a job. It keeps you on the lake. You are busy going to the place that will accept this voucher, going to the place that will accept your laundry voucher. And going through all of these motions wastes a large amount of time that you could spend actually being productive, actually doing things that might get you back on your feet, or that might get you a job, or get you out of the situation that put you on welfare in the first place. And that's what does tangible harm to the welfare system that the opening government provides to you. But secondly, we think that the stigma of this may actually prevent people from getting jobs in the first place. We think that the idea of having, of being somebody who the entire community is going to see as needing welfare, or as being a recipient of it, or being poor and not having demonstrable skills that have gotten you a job, is likely to entrench you in that situation, where hiring people, where hiring managers are going to think that they don't want to hire you because you don't have a job right now. You clearly aren't doing the things that you need to do. You're clearly not being involved in an economy that's meant to get you a job. And the fact that you're not engaging puts you in the system, gives this perception of you as somebody who's not working hard enough and doesn't deserve a job. And then the third harm that we tell you is that a lot of the people, a lot of the jobs who might employ people on welfare are also the same basic services they would be forced to frequent. We think that you'd have a lot of options. Your main employment options if you're on welfare are things like food service, are things like working at a grocery store. And that's exactly the kind of people who you're going to be embarrassed to be in front of. You're probably not going to want to apply to that job because those are the people who are seeing you receiving their services for welfare. And we think that that fundamental stigma is going to cause you a lot of harm. Before I move into my second point, is that okay?
Thank you. Which would you rather steal? $1,000 in cold hard cash or 25
Talk to
stamps
the
on
judges.
$1,000 in cold hard cash or 25 food stamps on a card that's convenient that refreshes every month automatically?
Okay, so we'll jump right into that right now. This is the second substantive point. This is the pragmatic argument that we bring you out of opening opposition, which is that people want cash. Why? Well, the anonymity of it and the more dignity that we just told you about, so you lose that right there on their side of the house. Also, you can't standardize the needs of people. You can't just standardize that everybody needs a certain amount of groceries. Maybe they have different food needs, maybe they have different needs going on. So, in this idea that something is more stealable, well, as a matter of fact, here's what happens with existing food vouchers. People sell them. At the end of the day, they get ripped off for this. Why? Because they're the poorest people in society, and they're the easiest to take advantage of. People are trying to convert these vouchers into cash no matter what. So it doesn't matter if they're less stealable if the first thing that you do with it is immediately turn it into the same money that they're telling you is so easy to take advantage of. And what we tell you is the harm to this is that people are going to get less money. If I'm one of the if I have one of these food stamps, it's very easy to take advantage of me because I'm not involved in the economy. I don't know what I'm doing with my purchases of my goods and services. So if somebody gives me a voucher that is effectively cost the government $10 to produce, and then they sell it to a pawn shop for $8, they get less money out of that. And we give our vouchers to those who don't need it. The people who accrue the benefits are the people who are buying the services that people are trying to convert to cash anyway. So they get less money, and we do less good with our welfare. It goes just to the wrong people. So our welfare becomes less effective. It helps the wrong people out, and it helps the right people less by taking the money that we put into the system and turning it into quantitatively less dollars. This is something they have to engage with on their side of the house, is that this money turns into less money specifically for the people they are trying to engage. So through their system, they're only increasing the harms to the people who are recipients of their welfare. And when that is the only people that they're telling you to value in the round, when that is the only thing that they're trying to affirm for you, you have to engage right there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, and now we will welcome Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
The side of the government today believe that the health and well-being of those that are at risk at the most vulnerable and poor sections of the country are the ones that need helping today. And while we believe that opposition may have a point in terms of the shame or the feeling that it's unpleasant to be poor, we agree. But we're willing to fight these harms in order to give the most efficient and effective means of helping these people so that they can lift themselves out of poverty, so that they can improve their situation and not have to feel that shame anymore. But we see that on the side of opposition, cash just does not provide this as adequately as the government's model does. So first I'll get into some rebuttal and then into my point of constructive matter, backing up what my partner's point is and providing new matter. So first of all, one of the biggest points on the side of opposition was that there is shame in poverty and that the government just wants to appear virtuous by helping people, with vouchers or whatever, when actually it's an indignity to be subject to this. We say that, as my partner brought up, there are some people in positions where they need these goods to survive, and that they may be in situations where they have a drug addiction, abusive spouse, where cash simply cannot be used the way it should be. So we agree that maybe it is shameful to be poor, and that's a harm we're willing to bite, instead of an abusive spouse stealing the cash that they receive and squandering it on alcohol, or someone taking it and wasting it on a gambling addiction. Whereas if we have a voucher or a card, with refreshing credits that can be used for food, this is much less easy to trade in or use, and I'll get to this point on the side of opposition soon. And it can be used more efficiently and more safely by those who really need it. And so this leads into my second point of rebuttal about the whole vouchers being easy to steal thing. In reality, when we look at government-based food stamp programs such as SNAP, we see that the rate of corruption and selling it to a pawn shop or whatever for less money, it's really very low. Actual data about SNAP shows it's one of the most effective ways to give welfare to a community. So we feel that this is not as big of an issue as opposition has made it out to be. And we see that even if people are willing to taking them at their best and saying that people do sell them for less market value than what they're worth or something, it's still less easy and there's less of a market for it than cash. The part of anonymity that they brought up in terms of cash being able to be used everywhere, we can see that cash stipends are more easily traded in or used for bad purposes than food vouchers or stamps for basic services. There's simply less of a demand for these things than just cold cash. It's just simply easier to spend cash than a voucher. No, thank you. Okay, now into my point of positive matter about accountability and how this will help both the government services in providing welfare and those in need of welfare in the long term. So we see that when a government takes on the responsibility of helping its most vulnerable populations, that the government needs to show accountability in how it manages these systems. And we see that cash stipends can often be at risk in terms of government budgeting and red tape and bureaucracy. We see that throwing money at a problem rarely solves these issues. Even within governments, especially, let's say non-Western liberal democracies, there's a lot of corruption, bribery, and otherwise unsavory things that can happen to money. So we don't want to see cash stipends be misused on the part of government employees to perhaps take some of this money for their own, or allocate more than is necessary and not have it go into the pockets of those who really need it. On our side of the house, we see that this effect is mitigated because vouchers and credits to be used for programs, welfare programs, can be much more easily accounted for and tracked than simply cash that is distributed to individuals. And second of all, we see, as an extension of my partner's point, this is helpful for accountability on the part of the individual. But yes, I'll take your POI.
So while you're on the subject of these markets, why don't you tell me why a voucher doesn't make the market less efficient when it's forcing people to, when you guarantees a clientele with certain customers in certain marketplaces?
We believe that a transfer into majority voucher-based or state-given services will result in an expansion of businesses and places that are willing to take these vouchers. So we don't believe it's limited to like 1 or 2 grocery stores or areas, especially given that there are many communities where the whole community can be low welfare and in fact have things such as food deserts, so they don't have a variety of choices anyways. We believe that this is most helpful for those people in need of the most basic goods where, when they have food deserts, they have a shortage of groceries and such overall. The government providing basic goods and services would be able to help them in that circumstance and funnel these things where it's necessary. But we are willing to fight the harm of market inefficiency, as my partner said, in order to help the people who need it the most in terms of basic needs. Now, back to my point of constructive matter, we see that this helps accountability on the side of people. So as my partner has talked about, having a voucher or going to a government for things like healthcare, electricity, and stuff, as subsidized by the government, is simply less risky and more effective than simply cash. We see that if you were able to receive a subsidy or something to, let's say, live in a section of housing specifically designated for you, it's much more difficult for an individual to take that money and misuse it for something else, or move into a less safe neighborhood. Any other examples where accountability on the side of the person may be doubted. And while we're not trying to say that impoverished individuals will always have bad desires or want to spend these things on inappropriate matters that don't help them, we do believe that there are circumstances that people are in that compel them or don't allow them to make the best choices for themselves, such as their family. Maybe they never received education on how best to spend their cash stipend. Maybe they never received information on how to invest, buy a car, buy a house. They might be scammed with these cash stipends if there are people able to take advantage of them. Or things, as we said, like drug addiction or alcohol habits. These really change a person and interfere with their rational decision-making process. So we believe that when government offers vouchers and the subsidy of basic goods and services, we see that, first of all, the government's accountability means that the government can put more into these people because they have less wasted on the side of government corruption. And we see that people are able to make better decisions or spend their money where they need, leading to long-term results, long-term goods, where they're able to lift themselves out of the conditions of poverty and away from the shame that opposition talks about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, and now we welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition, here.
Right. Good to go? Alright, Madam Speaker, the government's case and the reason why opposition can win, or should win, can be summarized with 2 words. Now, mutually exclusive harms that they bring to our side of the house. Now, I'm going to jump right in because there's a lot of material to talk about, and I'm going to show why all the harms that we get when we move to a completely voucher-based system from the existing cash-based system creates only harms that we see in their world and does not really help the world that we currently live in. Oh, by the way, notice the contradiction that the back half did. It's really rare in a debate now. You see the DPM knife the PM when she said, oh, we hate cash, when the PM comes up and says, we'll throw a little bit of cash in just for fun. So just notice that, and we'll move on to our second point. So they bring this idea, and CADE brings you this exclusive harm that we get about shame in poverty, which they kind of say, oh, but what about those poor people, and it will be helpful for this small section of society. So we're going to paint you a picture and see what this actually looks like. I asked NIKHIL in the PO, look at a person who's been a drug addict for 6 years, okay? He's used to taking drugs every day, and in the current status quo, we don't have the healthcare facilities to treat him. There's a reason he's been a drug addict for 6 years, and if you magically switch to a voucher-based system, you're not going to immediately fix the healthcare system. Even if it happens, it's going to take a time. So in the immediate time, you stop giving him money, and he now has vouchers. So but he's still addicted to drugs, so he needs money to buy the drugs. And you have to acknowledge the fact that there currently exists a market for vouchers. It happens. Okay, you can go to a pawn shop and sell your voucher. Now, what will happen in a situation where there's only vouchers available in the market? Like they say, it creates an inefficient market, and it's pretty obvious that in any inefficient market, you see the people who are the suppliers, the people who have low supply get screwed. So what will happen? Say there's a person, a voucher's for $10, and they go to a pawn shop. But just because there's not an appropriate market for vouchers, the guy will be like, you know what, this is only worth $8, and that guy has to pick it up for $8. So he's getting less than what the voucher is worth, and he's going to end up spending that on drugs anyway. We see that they do not actually solve for this problem, and it's a very likely scenario. And unless they can bring the argument that it does not happen exclusively, you should vote for the government side of the bench. Also, the entire theft argument and security argument that they bring boils down to the fact that, oh, you can steal $1,000 in cash, which is not true. Social security, the people don't carry their social security checks in their wallets, okay? That's just an absurd point, and we should not take a note of that. Vouchers, on the other hand, are tied to a person's name, which are less sellable unless you sign a legal agreement, so there's a lot more protection on that house. Please ignore the ignorance that the government has promulgated. So we're gonna jump right in and gonna refute the argument about, oh, government needs to show accountability by how this actually screws minorities. So, first of all, government needs to show accountability. Can we take a moment to laugh at that? In the age of Donald Trump government, where there's regular policies based on racial prejudices that exist in the status quo, they're trying to create a situation where government creates accountability. And we'll show you systematically with 3 layers of analysis why this can never happen. And this will end up screwing the minorities and end up screwing the people that they are trying to help the most. Number one, in this model, the government decides what required means are. Let that sink in. So the government comes and tells you, hey, I think you need food and I think you need water, but you're fine. I don't think you need housing. So in that situation, we're taking the independence away from people and actually screwing people who have special needs. So for example, in many countries like India, tampons are considered a luxury, right? Or even in the United States, they're taxed as a non-necessity item. So in this situation where the government's being like, I don't think tampons are necessary, but there's a woman who's too poor to afford tampons, she gets screwed, versus on the cash transfer side, she can actually buy her tampons. Sure, she might not be able to afford as much food and the model, and this is in the best case situation where it works completely efficiently. She can't afford as much food, but at least she has the basic necessities. It also creates a situation where other minorities, like transgender people who require special types of medication to survive, get screwed in the process, right? What if you're in a state, or what if the federal government is against the LGBT community in the current status quo, and they decide, you know what, we don't like this, and it's not going to work out. And in that situation, you get minorities screwed. So that's the first analysis I'll take you before that.
Apart from the fact that the speaker up here today is telling you that we should keep giving people cash so they can keep buying drugs, they can keep committing a crime, how do you propose that cash fixes the problem you just mentioned?
So here's the situation you have to analyze. So cash is not, we're not saying that cash will solve the drug addiction problem. We're arguing that their switching a voucher won't actually help it and will make their situation worse off. And that's the burden of the opposition. That's all we need to prove, that the status quo is better. And the only way to improve drug addiction problems to improve the healthcare system, which is independent of vouchers. The healthcare system on a large won't improve just because you have more vouchers if there's not anyone to treat you with drug addiction. If you go to a hospital with a voucher for free healthcare, but there's no one there to treat you, it doesn't really help you. Moving on to my second point, racial minorities. So NIKHIL comes up and says, oh, this will actually be helpful for racial minorities, but what this event will actually do is create a politically charged situation, right? It'll make setting what are vouchers and getting what defines mean tested vouchers or which region gets which distribution a completely politically tested affair. So we see this on a regular basis when it comes to defining regions, especially when it comes to racial minorities, right? Be it things like gerrymandering, right? Where you see the situation where people redraw borders or redraw counties specifically to exclude certain minorities. So it becomes really easy and provides enough access to government to actually screw specific minority regions, and actually does not help. So what does not help the situation? And again, this is an exclusive harm that we get on their side, which is not something we see with cash, okay? So in my first point, we clearly see that minorities clearly get affected. Minorities, be it women, transgender people, racial minorities, get thrust into this situation and actually can't help them out. So I'm going to quickly go through my second point and talk about a situation that would occur. So we would see a situation of basically welfare industrial complex, right? So whenever the government takes on big projects it does not have capacity for, it enters a situation where it has to hire it off with private contractors. So private contractors are now working with governments which are vulnerable and weak or don't know the specialty, and their customers are weaker sections of society who don't have agency to actually create change. So at that point, they see a situation where they can exploit by squeezing every dollar out of the poor people of society. Again, this is an exclusive harm that we get. In the current cash-based model, and which CADE already pointed out, they have the ability to go to the free market and compete. So why does opposition win this debate? Number one, we clearly show that there's clear exclusive harms that come from switching to a voucher-based system, though namely, it will screw the minorities. Number two, it will create shame and create underutilization. And number three, at the end of the day, it does not achieve any of the goals that they set forth. And that's why we're proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech, and now we will welcome Member of Government. You're here.
Everybody ready? So, judges, I have a question for you today. What could you buy for $1? For most poor people on welfare, unfortunately what they can buy for $1 is whatever's on the McDonald's dollar menu that night. So what we see is uniquely when the government uses vouchers, they can buy products wholesale, making things cheaper and being able to provide more goods to more people, which is why we have this whole means-tested welfare thing in the first place. Moving in this, and I'll expand more upon this later, this is going to be back half's unique extension. But jumping right into rebuttal. So, his main part about government accountability, the problem with this argument is that the whole means-tested welfare thing applies to both goods and services and cash payments. So, however much money the government is giving you is based on what they determined that you need. So you still have this problem in goods and services, rather than goods and services. Moving on to your next point about dignity. So, poor people feel ashamed of being poor. In other news, water is wet. Of course that's true. The only way to not feel shitty about being poor is to not be poor. And the only way you stop being poor is to use our model of food vouchers rather than your cash payment. Because your pragmatic thing falls through, because people don't, again, as we said, people suck at spending money, essentially. That simply put, you assume that these people are going to spend the money in the best way possible, when we've shown you that through problems like addiction, abuse, and many other cases, that simply put, these people aren't necessarily going to spend the money in the best way. I'll take your point now.
Okay, so stop being stupid, engage with the point. It's not the harm that people feel bad being poor. The harms are that you spend all day running around cashing vouchers, you lose jobs, the stigma keeps you from getting jobs, and you're scared to apply to jobs that might actually hire you. Engage with the actual argument.
Of course. So, your point being that people are going to spend all day running around cashing these things, simply put, it's crazy. Like, the stores that unfortunately, these people all live in poor communities, so the stores that service them take these food stamps pretty easily. So, no. Second off, applying for jobs, once again, that's how you stop being poor, is you have to work these jobs, unfortunately. And that's how you get out of this cycle of poverty.
Okay.
I don't get what you're trying to say clearly, apparently. Also, about your point with the heroin addict. In your system with cash-based payments, he just buys heroin until he overdoses and dies. At least on our side, he's still alive. No thanks. Okay, moving out of rebuttal and on to the unique extension. So the unique extension of back half today is that, simply put, when government wants to buy things wholesale, they can buy a lot more stuff, a lot more food, a lot more stuff using the voucher system, and that allows. Simply put, that allows for more efficiency because when one person buys some, when one person buys, a head of broccoli, it costs It costs it costs several dollars. When the government buys, 500 heads of broccoli, it costs a lot less. Basically, cross-apply this analogy to basically goods and services in general, and that despite them saying that everyone's needs are different, everyone still needs food, everyone still needs water, and everyone still needs a place to sleep. These are pretty common, basic needs, and that's what this welfare is about. I don't think it's that different among these groups of people. So even in a world where everyone is spending their cash perfectly, and not on drug abuse, addiction, and a variety of other things which we've already detailed. So even in that world where that doesn't happen, and people spend the money perfectly, it would still be cheaper, and we could still provide more goods and more services to more people if we bought wholesale and if we used these vouchers rather than just raw cash payments. Reiterating some of the points that front half made because they were quite good points. Actually, before that, I'll take back half. Engage with back half.
So, what a member of government has proposed to us right now, wholesale already exists in the status quo, as we've seen with food stamps, and the government has already been investing in this wholesale format for the past few decades.
And food stamps are a government voucher program, not a cash program. I fail to see what your point is there. That's just kind of helps us, question mark? So, essentially that's it. Well, that's it. People to point out. I already took front half. I took more than enough points. Stop it. Your dignity rebuttal, again, the only way to not be ashamed of being poor is to not be poor, and we see that you stay poor in your cash system because people don't spend the money as effectively as they could for a variety of extenuating circumstances, which front half has more than been happy to list out for you. So your pragmatic reason simply falls flat. Dignity point doesn't stand. Actually, I will take a point about racial minorities because I actually didn't get that. Could you talk about that? Could you remind me of that point again so I can rebut it?
Government commission argues about the efficiency of government and the wholesale idea. That's why Social Security is bankrupt. Can you give us an actual government social program that's run efficiently?
SNAP. As they said, SNAP was, as front half once again has already brought to you. Thank you, Zach. SNAP was an effective, is an effective program that is low corruption and is a great way of giving out aid to people. So there you go. So simply put, as we can see for the reasons that less corruption, less likely to be stolen, less likely to be squandered, more efficient overall through the purpose of through wholesale methods. And the fact that it prevents these abuses that cash fails to account for, and the fact that essentially opposition doesn't really give you any good points, we strongly urge a government ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that speech, and now we will member of opposition.
So, we've all heard the saying, cash is king. The government side has proposed to you today a discriminatory system in which the poor will have no chance to get back up on their feet. And I'm going to show you how the poor families and individuals will have a chance at competing with the rest of society. Before I go into some background and my unique point, I'd like to give some rebuttal. There isn't much to engage with on the government side. So I will bring up some old rebuttal from front half, specifically the Prime Minister, who mentioned that cash is easily stolen. It was rebutted by our opening opposition, but I will again reiterate that Social Security is tied to a name. They do receive this payment, this cash, quote unquote, in a check form. So they can decide to put it in an account. There is no issue of stealing here. Also, the government side generalizes that cash stipends will be misused and that this cash will be spent on alcohol and drugs. But this is a false generalization that doesn't apply to everybody who is poor. They are not addressing those who are trying to get back on the radar and compete with the rest of society. Again, moving on to a little bit of background before I get into my unique point. The current status quo gives those individuals who are poor, poor individuals and the families, food stamps. We have programs like Medicare. We have programs like Section 8 housing, where housing is provided to those individuals and families who are not doing so well. And all of these programs exist to ultimately help these families and these individuals who are not doing the greatest and want to try their best to assimilate into society. What the government is proposing will not allow these poor individuals and families to assimilate back into society. Moving on into my first point, or my point of positive, unique point of extension. The government cannot provide every single need, and the tagline here is that needs vary, especially from family to family. Not all families are in need of the same things, and the ability of having something material like cash allows these families and individuals to decide what is most effective for them and what needs that they have that need to be fulfilled. And they can then do this with the cash that they receive. Vouchers simply do not fulfill this need, especially from the model that the government has presented. They do not address this. Not right now. We, the closing opposition, solve for this needs issue that I've presented by continuing our current programs that exist in the status quo and allowing individuals and families to choose what they want to spend or save this money on. And not only is this money that is being paid, these stipends that are being paid to these individuals and families, we can't only look at it in a spending fashion. We have to look at it in a saving fashion, where some of these individuals and families, rather than generalizing that all of them are spending it on alcohol and drugs, some of them are actually trying to get a head start or jump start their career and change their path and assimilate back into society. Before I move on, I will take a point from back.
So you spoke about the role of the government.
Sorry, can you speak
You spoke about how this is a
To
point
the
of
judges.
yeah. So this is a point of clarification. So you spoke about how the government may not know what these people want. But correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking about mean-tested benefits. Whether it comes to money or stamps, the government anyway is going to assess how much each family is going to need. That's how mean-tested works.
Okay, thanks for. I will clarify that. Yeah. So in the government side, they are proposing to. Well, again, the Prime Minister's model is a little bit interesting and to save a little bit of the money and have a little bit of voucher, this awkward middle ground. But let's say we take the model that the Deputy Prime Minister brought up and sticking with no cash and only vouchers, the government provides these already in the status quo, and we are defending the status quo in the sense that these individuals and families will be able to decide what that is spent on for their own needs. The government is providing certain programs like healthcare and food stamps, but that's separate from the cash stipend, which then allows those poor individuals and families to decide what they need for themselves, for their current situation. I'll not be taking any more notes. So again, as I said, you can only do so much with basic needs and services, basic goods and services, and the model that the government has presented doesn't allow for families or individuals to jumpstart their career or path. I'd like to finish by summarizing my points and summarizing my portion of the debate. That, again, needs vary family to family, and what the government has presented does not address all of the needs that these individuals and families have, and that in conclusion, we want a society where all individuals are treated as equals, and that is what the off-bench is standing for. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will welcome Government Whip to summarize the debate.
Is to create this perfect welfare system. They spoke about the needs and how it needs to fit like each family separately and so on and so forth. And what we need to understand is we're never going to have a perfect welfare system. We just need something that's better than status quo. And that is what we are proposing on side government. And I'm going to prove to you throughout my speech. I'm going to address 3 clash points, and I'm going to tell you on why side government wins, and better off why bottom half wins. So on a first level, I'm going to analyze who is someone that needs welfare benefits. And on secondly, I'm going to analyze this public perception and when it comes to governments and how they go about their ways. And on a thirdly, it's this whole argument of money versus vouchers, and really where is the poor better off, like economically, so on and so forth, like all of it, where are they better off in the end? So here's the thing, right? Like I kept seeing this image that food stamps were like the worst thing ever, like this perception thrown around, and I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing. So when it comes to the first clash point about who is someone that needs a welfare benefit, chances are you're someone that doesn't have access to proper food, to water, and like to basic necessities. So the idea is we give you this money and you're going to go out in the world and get these things on your own. But the problem in status quo is this transaction's not happening. You give the money to these people. They don't necessarily do this. They usually spend it on addiction or like certain things that sort of progress the cycle of poverty. And we're stuck in this turmoil situation where the government is constantly giving the money and it's not necessarily going to a productive place where they're better off. In the end game, we want to know where the poor people are better off, and this is not necessarily where it's happening. So this whole argument about, oh, they might want to use the money for this, that, no, they need to use the money for food and like these basic necessities, because that's why they're in the welfare group in the first place. It's not a different reason. They're in it because they lack that, and the government is essentially giving them directly what they lack, and we don't think that's bad at all. We think it's efficient, and if it's going to take their freedom of choice to what they can do with this money, be it, we don't mind. If the end benefit is that these people are going to be better off, in better health, better lack of food, in a situation where they can actually get a job because they're not perpetually sick. This is one of the reasons that poor people find it very hard to find work. If it's going to put them in a better situation, be it, we think it's better off there. So this second this second issue about public perception, and they try to, and side of government try to like spur this argument about, you know, where like people won't have money, they won't be affecting the economy, you know, they don't have this monetary freedom, and side like bottom half brought up savings. Like, let's stop a second and just really examine the situation. Chances are these people don't have money at all to save, and you assuming that they're going to use these welfare benefits to save is the biggest joke of all, because chances are they need all this money to survive. This isn't a question of like, this isn't a question of longevity. This is like, what can you do at this precise moment to ensure that I have a sustainable living in the next few days? And we're saying this is where they're better off in the short term, and in the long term they're going to be a better place, because in the end game we want these people not to be claiming welfare benefits anymore. We want them to be at a point where they don't have to claim it at all. And on our side we get them there faster, because right now it's not happening. That's why we're discussing this issue in the first place. Like, we did money, it didn't work, people are still claiming welfare benefits. It's used for the wrong reasons. The government is basically aiding people to become addicts and continue this cycle of being addicts. So no, we're saying we're putting our foot down, and we're saying no, we're going to go with our side. Yeah, we'll take from bottom half.
On what the opposition is proposing will not allow for growth from the poor. What we want is we want everybody to have an equal chance at growth, and for these individuals and families who are not as privileged to be able to assimilate into society.
Look, they don't have growth. That is status quo. The problem is people aren't using this money effectively. They're not using it for the right things, so that gets them to a point where they can achieve growth, where they can get a job. They're at this point where it's not happening. So the government needs to intervene. And that gets on to me my third point, the most important one, this issue of money versus vouchers. No, I'm not going to take another point, so don't bother. So this whole idea about this whole inefficiency. So why do we have welfare benefits in the first place? Because the current market had an externality, a negative externality, where people were left out. So this was the ineffectiveness. So the government intervened, started providing these benefits to hopefully like help people, put them in a better situation, and so on and so forth. But that didn't necessarily happen. Like, it's still going on, and we're still there, because we're never going to have this perfect welfare benefit. But the reason is we're worsening the situation right now. So we're actually continuing this inefficiency that exists. We're already in an inefficiency situation. Like, the fact that a burger is more cheaper than a carrot, I'm guessing, or like some sustainable vegetable is a problem. And that's really why we think we win this argument, because we told you about this wholesale concept. The government is able to spend $5 way differently than a poor person is able to spend $5. The government actually helps people get access to fresh vegetables, to food that they don't have access to. I remember when I watched Food Inc., like this family from a middle-income family spoke about how it's difficult for them to buy groceries and how it's much easier for them to go eat from McDonald's and Chick-fil-A. I told you I'm not taking a point. And that's an issue at hand, that families right now in America find it easier and cheaper to shop at McDonald's for food than Ralph's. And this is just a middle-income family. I don't know exactly what happens to people on welfare. It's a much worse situation. So the government is directly giving them access to fresh vegetables, and so this is what bottom house specifically brought up, what my partner said. And this is so important, because this is the thing that's going to, this is going to be the catalyst element that helps people get into a better situation, that helps them become healthier, get access to jobs, because now they'll be in a better situation. And like, we need them to utilize, we need them to have access to these basic necessities, which they don't actually get access to because they don't utilize this money carefully. But on a better hand, when the government starts using these food stamps and try to provide better services, because the government does it on wholesale, we're actually providing it on a better scale and better quantity than they could. Because right now, maybe one food stamp may be worth like $20, but what the government can do with it is exponentially much higher. So we want, on our side, on bottom half government, we have better, I don't know.
Thank you very much, and now we welcome Position Rep.
Yeah.
Guys, is it okay if I write hashtag carrots not coke on the board?
Huh?
Hashtag
After.
carrots not coke.
After you can do that.
Carrots not coke.
Like 10 minutes.